former Fulton County District Attorney and Sheriff.
Formerly a judge, and he knows a little bit about how these things go.
From Mohawk Valley, legal eagle, lawman.
He is the Sheriff of Fulton County, New York. Just such an amazing guy.
This is the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.
Welcome, everybody. You're listening to the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. Our guest today is Sara Boerenko. Sara is the director of the mental health director for the county of Montgomery in upstate New York. And we're going to talk a little bit about, now that the election is over, the divisiveness, not only that is with neighbors, but with friends and even with families. And also we're into the holiday season, Thanksgiving and Christmas. So Sara's going to tell us a few of the tips to getting through the seasons with all the stress and depression and anxiety that we all have. Thank you for coming on, Sara. You there?
I am, Sheriff, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be asked by you to be on a podcast with you, talking about some of these really important mental health issues that are impacting not only us as adults, but the anxiety some of our children are feeling as a result of hearing us as adults talk about the holidays coming up, politics in the state of the world. So I'm honored to be here with you today.
Thank you very much for the kind words. Sara, one of the things is we always have anxiety, depression, little loneliness, and sometimes despair. And we have a higher incidence of mental health calls and suicides around the holidays. But now you're taking not only Thanksgiving and Christmas, but we're also compounding it with the recently completed election, which had not only our country divided, there was a lot of our friends, neighbors, and family that were on different sides of the campaigns or had different candidates they preferred. So tell us about some of the type of stresses that occur, not only because of the holidays, but because of the political things, which most people wouldn't think are so divisive, but they really are. And we get a lot of anxiety, and a lot of muttering under your breath, I should say, of people. So you tell us a little bit about what kind of issues do you guys see, and how does now the campaign, which is now a third thing, if you look at Thanksgiving and Christmas, really a third compounder?
Absolutely. Well, I think first, Sheriff, it's important to understand what is anxiety. When I work with individuals who struggle with anxiety and depression, I always let them know that the definition of anxiety is a constant and persistent fear of an unknown factor, right? When we're unknown, when we have something that we are unsure about, it causes this feeling, and we don't always know how to identify it. So as a clinician myself, I always work with people and I'll say, what you feel is normal because we don't know. Our body's natural response to things that we do not know is restless sleep, overeating, maybe consuming too much alcohol or recreational drugs or illegal drugs, or over prescribing ourselves. So when we talk about the state of where we are now, you're 100% correct. It's that perfect storm. We're coming off of an election that divided a number of families, country, neighbors, friends. And then we're moving into a holiday where we're supposed to be joined and jolly and happy and really celebrate our love for Thanksgiving. If you think about what Thanksgiving was, it's the founding of our country, people coming here and sharing a meal together. And traditionally, a lot of families will play football in the street, or they will sit and watch the football game, the Thanksgiving Day parade. All of these events that are supposed to be unifying and joyful. But if you have family that has been disagreeing throughout January to November on politics, the state of the world, a variety of things, it can make Thanksgiving difficult. Then moving into Christmas, which is supposed to be that magic season, people sometimes don't feel very magical. So I think, going back to what we were talking about with that post-anxiety of the election, during the holidays, we always say there's two topics you never bring up, right? You never bring up politics and you never bring up religion. A couple of years ago, you and I were having conversations about not bringing up the pandemic because people were very divided. And I think we're just coming off of a place where people were divided over the pandemic. A lot of families stopped speaking over vaccinations, masks, not gathering too much. And now with the contentious state of the political world that we're facing, I don't know if we've really had time to regroup and get ourselves back to a place of feeling comfortable and okay to discuss topics that we should be able to amongst ourselves without feeling that anxiety or that anger towards each other, especially our family. So for me, when I look at that, avoiding it is not always the best thing. Avoidance is not going to make it go away. It's not going to make it stop because it's there. So really being able to say to our families and sometimes our own parents or our grandparents, we are not going to agree on this. So I don't feel comfortable ruining Thanksgiving over politics or religion.
So what's interesting too is it's like it seems that this election, because of the participants, because of how it altered in the last few months when Joe Biden was replaced with Kamala Harris, and just they call it Trump syndrome, or whatever. And he really, a lot of people either love him or hate him, or wish he wouldn't say certain things. And that leads to a big emotional divide. A lot of politics, it almost seems, is emotionally driven and some is fact driven. But when you're talking with emotions on one side and you're talking facts, they don't meet. One thing I did want to mention is when people don't realize this, when you're having these heated discussions with your spouse, your family, or other friends, any of the kids present hear that. They might not always understand what it's about or follow the politics, but they sense the antagonism between the parties. They sense that you're not happy. You're not happy with your brother, your sister, your cousin. You're not happy with your neighbors. And how does that affect the kids? And how do you explain to the kids that, Daddy and Uncle Bart aren't happy today, but we still love each other? What tools do you use for those situations?
Absolutely. I think that's really insightful. What do you do? So you have your child who knows that mom's not happy, dad's upset. There's a heated discussion going on. But just like you said, Sheriff, saying to your children, mommy and Aunt Sally don't agree on a lot of things, but the one thing we agree on is that we love you and we love your cousin and we love being a part of this family. And it's okay for grown-ups to not have, similar opinions. And when you get older, saying to your child, when you get older, you're going to have friends that you don't agree on. And I say this to my son all the time. I'm a Mets fan, diehard Mets fan till I die. My husband is a diehard Yankees fan. Thank God he's not a Red Sox fan or a Phillies fan. We don't agree on baseball, but it doesn't mean that we can't have conversations about who has better pitching this year, or who should have went to the World Series and who should have stayed home, Aaron Judge. But in looking at those conversations, it's normalizing and finding context for your child. In my son's school, they did an election. They voted on their favorite ice cream. Was it chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry? And their class was very divided. It was almost a third on ice cream. So it's telling your children it's okay to have different opinions. We all like different things. We all like different people. But it's still remembering at the end of the day that as family, we love each other. And that's what we're here for at Thanksgiving, at Christmas. We're going to hear things that we don't like. But remembering, no matter what, mommy loves you and daddy loves you and our family love our children. And I think that's really what our kids need to hear, is that no matter what happens in the grown-up world, it's about them and how much we love them.
Yeah. And I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I know from our call volume, when we hit Thanksgiving and we hit Christmas, we do get a lot more family disputes, a lot of domestic violence incidents. We get a lot more arguments that seem to escalate. And is part of the pressure of the holidays, or is it, why does it seem to spike? It's also, the other thing is, and I don't know about you, but I don't have to be a counselor or psychologist. I hate it when it's dark when we get up and dark when you get home from work. That just throws off my circadian rhythm or whatever it is. And I just feel more like I'm dragging. And a lot of people I talk to are like, I don't know if I got allergies, or you're just tired because of the darkness.
Absolutely. There's a lot of different components and they're all 100% spot on. We're losing sunlight. Seasonal affective disorder is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at seasonal depression, that is a tried and true diagnosis. People get very depressed. We need sunlight. We need light. So you're right. We get up and it's dark. We come home. We get out of work. It's dark. If you're working in a jail, that you oversee, how many of your COs don't see sunlight for their 8-hour, 10-hour shift that they're there? The other component of that is the stress of the holidays. We're very much at a place now where the more the better. We forget, that our children don't need a $500 Xbox. They don't need $350 sneakers. They want those things, but a lot of families don't have the capacity, especially with the economy nowadays, to be able to afford those lavish gifts, plus put food on the table, plus put gas in the car to get to see grandma and grandpa. So there's a lot of reasons why things get heated. And then what do we do at the holidays? The first thing you do when you walk through the door is, are you hungry? Do you want a drink? I've got cold beer in the fridge. Do you want me to pop a bottle of wine? If you think about the amount of alcohol that is consumed from the evening of Thanksgiving, so Thanksgiving Eve, the night before, and when I was in college, they used to call it Wild Turkey Wednesday. You know what I mean?
Yep.
All the college kids would come home from college and you would go to those bars that you couldn't go to when you were underage, and you would get, intoxicated, and then you would go home, and then you'd get up on Thanksgiving, and most families, they have a couple drinks while they're getting the turkey ready. They're drinking mimosas. We're having Bloody Marys. And then that drinking goes throughout the day. Now you've got football on, and people are mad because, the Steelers are beating the Giants or whoever is playing, right? That adds a whole nother level of competition, your favorite football team. And then there's parties. There's a holiday, a Christmas party every weekend from the, Thanksgiving straight through to Christmas. And then there's New Year's Eve, and that's alcohol, it's food. So I think you're right. You see a lot of those increased domestic violence calls. You see a lot of people getting into altercations, verbal and physical, because of alcohol, substances that come into play, and the pressure of, I didn't get the thing I wanted for Christmas, or this person wasn't there on Thanksgiving. Or you have, maybe it's your first Christmas or Thanksgiving without your mom, your dad, your spouse, your brother, your sister. With people passing away, that first holiday, whether it's Father's Day, Mother's Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, is always an added level of anxiety and depression. What is Christmas going to be like this year? Because my grandfather died and he always carved the turkey, or he always handed out the presents. What does that look like? How do I explain that to my children who are little, that grandpa's not going to be there? So there's a lot of different factors, I think, that play into the holidays, that seasonal depression, that anxiety. Did I do enough? Or you go to a family gathering and somebody gives you a present and you weren't expecting a present from that person. So now you feel terrible because you didn't think about giving that person a present. So I've had people in my life who say, oh, I keep, the extra gifts in my car. And if somebody gives me a present, or when I'm putting presents out and I see one to Sara from Rich, I run out to my car and grab the generic present that's in the trunk and write his name on it quick and put it under the tree.
I don't need a gift. Money's fine. In fact,
absolutely.
It is very unusual, because you feel very uncomfortable when people stop to say hi and they have a gift, and it's like, geez, you feel guilty in a way that, I didn't get them anything. And then how do you say, well, you didn't make my list of 58 people,
Right.
But I do think that it's real important what you touched on with the parents, the spouses. I mean, even people who lose kids. This has been a busy year. The summer's busy for us with accidents, and then it ramps up towards the holidays. One of my friends lost a child. One of my friends lost a spouse in the last month. And I think, they were married over 40 years, and you think that now this is the first holiday coming up right on the heels of it. And it's hard to say to somebody, you can't say, I understand, because if you haven't lost a spouse, you can't understand. If you didn't lose a child, and is there a right thing to say? Like you call Uncle Bill and say, hey, Unc, you guys come every year. We're still upset about, Aunt Karen passing away, but we'd really like you to join us. I know you said you didn't want to go out, but it'd be nice to have you with everybody. Or how do you approach those people, and how do you broach the subject?
Absolutely. And I think just what you said, you call and you say, hey, I know that this has been a crappy year. You don't sugarcoat things. And I know you miss her and we miss her, but you not being here, we're going to miss you too. And we would love for you to be here. If you can't stay very long, we get it. But we don't want you to be alone. And we want you to always know that you're never alone. In my mental health department, every single piece of information that we put out is hashtagged with the earmark, "You are not alone," because there is always, always somebody there for you, no matter who it is, whether it's one of our hotline crisis numbers, a neighbor. There's always somebody, and people feel very alone, especially when there's a death or a large loss. And we want people to understand you're not alone. And sometimes it's better to be in the company of strangers. I know the first year after I lost my grandfather, I didn't necessarily want to be with my family, but I found solace in midnight mass at church. People who didn't know me, who weren't going to say, "I'm so sorry," or "I miss him," or "This is horrible being at Graham's house without Poppy here." It was very comforting to me to be with people at church who didn't give me their sympathy. They just embraced me. And I think it's different for everybody, but always extending that invitation. We miss you as much as you miss her or him. And just letting people know that you're there and they're not alone.
I think that's a key. We got to take a commercial break. You're listening to the Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet. Our guest is Sara Boerenko, who's the Director of Mental Health for the County of Montgomery in upstate New York. And we're talking about holiday depression and seasonal affective disorder and some tools for getting through the holidays. We've had a contentious election just completed. We've had family, friends, and neighbors not talking, and we got the holidays coming up, which can be very sad, especially if you lost a loved one or have had issues with people in the last year and you don't want to be together. You can follow us by liking us, sharing, subscribing, and follow us on X, YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, Apple, Rumble, and all other excellent platforms that play excellent podcasts and mine. Sara, are you still there?
I am, Sheriff. Thank you.
So one of the other things, and I didn't realize this until my friends got divorced. It's divorce plays an impact for the kids, and two components overlap. It's when you have mixed families, there's a lot of running around. Okay, we're going to go to grandpa and grandma's on this side, grandpa and grandma's on that side. We're going to spend the morning with this parent or the afternoon with this parent. And I didn't realize that maybe sometimes if the kids are younger, they don't absorb it and understand everything that's going on. But sometimes there's a little competitiveness as to, well, like you said, well, I'm getting a $200 pair of sneakers. Well, I got them a $300 pair of sneakers. And not everyone has money. And I think it's more for the parents to feel better that they did something. But I'm not an expert, but I'm saying, and I think when kids are young, it's easier to, we're going to grandpa's, we're going to dad's, we're going to mom's. But I think when they get older, is there any tips people should know in explaining to kids, and what age usually do you see that is when the kids need to have the talk to understand?
Right. Well, I think one of the biggest mishaps that I hear parents, as a therapist, kids would always, as adults, come to me and say, "I always hated it when my parents said, 'Now you'll have 4 Christmases.' Mommy and daddy are splitting up. So now you're going to go to Grandma Bill's and Grandpa Bill's or whatever. And you're going to have Christmas at Grandma's, Christmas at Grandpa's, and then Christmas with Mommy and Christmas with Daddy." And kids would say to me as adults, I hated that. I didn't want 4 Christmases. I wanted one Christmas with everybody together. And nobody ever asked me. And I was fortunate. I didn't grow up in a split family. My parents have been married 46 years. They, are happily married. And, I was fortunate. But as an adult, we think that kids want more. And when they grow up, they don't remember those $300 sneakers. They're not going to remember that their dad bought them this or their mom bought them that. They're going to remember who was there and what you did with me. And so when you talk to adult children of divorce, they will always say, I couldn't tell you what I got for Christmas that year, but I remember going to my grandmother's and my grandmother making me soup. Or I remember going to my father's house and just sitting there and reading a book with him. Those are the things that adult children of a divorce have said to me over the years as they get older. So I hope if there's parents who have little ones who are listening today, that they really understand, yes, you're trying to fix it by give them more and have 4 Christmases and do all of these things, but it's adults that we're trying to really grow and develop. It's not children. They're only little for a little while. So as an adult, show them the true meaning of being together as a family. play board games. If you can't afford a, extravagant Christmas for your children, ask them what they want for breakfast or what they want to do. And I
Mhm.
think as a child, even for myself, thinking about that now, growing up, my mother and father never asked me, do you want to go to grandma and grandpa's? It was just, we're going to open presents and then we're going to grandma and grandpa's for lunch
Mhm.
at 12. Well, maybe I didn't want to do that, but nobody ever asked me. And again,
Mhm.
I didn't come from a split family, but just asking your kids, what would you like to do? And I think we get into places where parents are divorced and they're going through a contentious divorce, and they forget that they at one point loved each other enough to have
Mhm.
children. So asking your child, what is good for you today? It's important.
It isn't so much of it, and you hit on it because it's more like even with the younger kids, hey, why don't you help mommy make this? Why don't you help daddy do this? Hey, come with daddy, let's set up the tree. Come with daddy, come with mommy, or let's help grandpa do this or that. Let's help grandma do this or that. And those little things that integrate them into helping and being part of the whole setup can sometimes be more than gifts and more than multiple. They'll remember that more. I remember that I helped Grammy make the applesauce, or simple tasks.
Yeah.
um I think, and you've probably seen this more than I, we've seen more and more, definitely COVID hit us, the contentiousness of society, and I think more adults are turning off and tuning out, or tuning out, and whatever you want to call it, because they don't want to say the wrong thing and be canceled. They now have kids who are in school that are being raised through the school, being told, well, you got to say this or that. You got to know your pronouns. And it's confusing to older people like me. But I also think it's confusing to the kids. And then when the parents, like some parents, not a lot, but some get withdrawn and say, I don't want to say the wrong thing you know and I think a lot of that is added to the mental health issues. We noticed a dramatic increase without looking at statistics. We felt, and I mentioned it on the radio several times, we thought 40% increase in another hospital admissions or visits by young kids when COVID was going on. And then they spent millions of dollars to do a study, and the Surgeon General and the end of 2021 said, oh, we've just completed a study, and yes, the kids were affected adversely because they can't see their faces. And my argument at the time was COVID was a real thing. People were dying. We didn't know how to handle it. Our leaders didn't know how to handle it. But what we do know is for most people, COVID was going to pass. Most people were going to die. You're going to get sick. It passed. So whether you're an anti-vaxxer, didn't get a vax, but the problem I saw was that the kids couldn't see the other kids' faces when they were at school or on a camera because they had a mask on. So you don't know if they were smiling or sad or whatever. And then for people who had pre-existing anxiety or a little withdrawn, it multiplied that effect. And I told somebody, I said, the problem with COVID's going to stop. And people are going to go on about their lives. But in 5 years, if you had anxiety before COVID, something's going to trigger it. If you got anxiety or depression during COVID, something can trigger it. So it's unlike the COVID itself, it's not going to stop. 7 years from now, something's going to trigger your pre-existing anxiety or your depression, because as you and I know, mental health issues, you can get better. They don't always go away.
Right. And that's how, when we opened today, I said the definition of anxiety is this constant and persistent fear of unknowns. But once you know what's happening, so once we knew we lived through COVID, now the new anxiety becomes the next thing, the election, the holidays. Am I going through a divorce? It's interesting because we see a lot of studies that said during COVID, the spike of divorce, the spike of babies being born increased, but we didn't see a spike in marriages because people couldn't get married because, venues were shut down. People were refusing to get married until they could have the wedding of their dreams, which is fine. But we haven't seen any post studies about that. How many of those couples that got divorced, did they reconcile? The stress of being married and the holidays and all of those things you and I just talked about and those anxieties. And you had lots of husbands and wives that differed on what they were going to do in their own family based on COVID and sending the child or the kids to school with masks. You had parents, saying when they're with me, they're not going to wear a mask. Well, when they're with me, they have to. We're not going to do these things. We're going to do these. Parents saying they had to get vaccinated. I'm refusing to get them vaccinated. So kids were used a lot in that middle for grown-up conversations, which take COVID out of it, Sheriff. You could put divorce in there. You can put moving in there. You can put being mad at grandma in there. You can put a lot of other factors in there for our children to give them anxiety. And I have said to my friends, I have even said to my own spouse, I don't want to talk about this because I don't want to put my anxiety and my questions on our kids, and they can hear us. Your children, no matter where they are in your house, you think they don't hear you. They hear you. They hear everything. I swear children have bionic hearing. You could be in your basement and your child could be upstairs in the attic and they will hear every word of that conversation. Parents, we have eyes in the back of our head. Kids have ears everywhere. And so remembering that we don't want to give our children our own anxieties, but the flip side of that is we also want to give them information, realistic, sustainable, logical information. So I know my son, when we were going through COVID, when it started, he was 3. And then he started kindergarten, obviously at 5, and he had to wear a mask and he didn't understand why. And I just explained to him, these are the rules right now. Just like when we were in daycare, there was no running in the halls. There was no drinking apple juice, unless you were sitting at the table. So I very much had to explain, different rules to him. And I just said, things are going to change. They're going to be different. But right now, this is what we have to do. And, my own child, who is 8, we're going through the car seat negotiation right now because he weighs enough and he's at a place where he doesn't necessarily need a full harness booster seat. So there's that negotiation component. And I say he's either going to lead the country or I hope and pray he never leads the gang in jail. But his negotiation skills at 8, right? He's really trying to figure out life. And I think as parents, we forget that's our job, is to help them figure out those components of life without giving them our own worries and our own anxieties. I get so anxious every day putting him in the car. But I have to make sure that he doesn't absorb my own fear of him moving to that next phase of a safety seat because it's real for me, but just letting him know, hey, we're almost to that point. You're getting big. Yes, you still have to sit in the back seat. If I'm moving the car in the driveway, you can sit in the front seat just because we're moving the car. But when we leave this driveway, you are sitting in that back seat. And that is the law. And in my county, it's Jeff Smith. And so I will say to him, Jeff Smith is not putting mommy in jail because you're breaking the law. And so that, right? So he's getting
I just want to do one more plug, and then I want to wrap up with what do people need to know about signs of people who are depressed or potentially suicidal, and how should they handle it? There's a lot of information on the internet, but when we come back, I want you to just let us know if I missed anything that they should know about the holidays and conversing. But I also want to know, what do we do when we have a friend or family who acts depressed, but we're not professionals? And how do you handle that? So again, folks, you're listening to the Rich Giardino Show. Sara Boerenko is the Director of Mental Health for Montgomery County in upstate New York. And we're talking about some interesting topics involving the holidays, involving the election, and the mental health, not only of we as adults, but as our children also. And you can like, share, and subscribe on Apple, YouTube, X, Spotify, Rumble, or whatever else, Facebook and whatever. But Sara, as we go to wrap up, tell us, how do we handle family, friends, or neighbors who may act out, say stuff that raises an issue, whether they're suicidal or maybe suicidal? How do you handle that? What should people know to do?
So in the law enforcement world and in security, you have a slogan. It's called "See something, say something."
Correct.
So it's very much the same thing in mental health. If I see something, I need to ask something. And I am very blunt with people. I will say to them, are you thinking about your own death? And if they say yes, I will say to them, are you thinking about killing yourself? And people sort of take a step back because that's like a harsh statement. But there is a difference between thinking about suicide. And I've said this to you before, Sheriff. I think about suicide all day, every day, because that's my job, right? But when I come home, I'm not thinking about killing myself. There's a big difference there. So when you're working with folks, when you see a neighbor, when you see a friend who is acting in a way that you are concerned about, they're not himself. She's not acting herself. They're not happy. They have those holiday blues. Just asking, are you thinking about killing yourself? Or is there something I can do right now to help you? And most of the time people will say, thank you for asking. Nobody has asked me that, or nobody cares enough about me to ask me. And then I answer that by saying, but I do. And you're not alone. And then we get them help. We get them resources. There's the 988 hotline number through Montgomery and Fulton County. Our crisis hotline number here locally is 518-842-9111. And that is answered 24 hours a day by a trained licensed professional between Fulton and Montgomery County. We have funding to support that hotline 24/7. Again, 518-842-9111. There's also the 988 crisis hotline suicide prevention number that's across the country. You can pick up the phone and call. You can text. I love working with our sheriff's office because if I'm concerned about something, I can pick up the phone and call dispatch, much like you can in Fulton County, and say, I don't know what to do. And somebody can help me through that process. And I think we forget, you don't have to be a clinician of 20 years with experience to save somebody's life. You just have to tell them that you love them and you care about them and they're not alone and you're there for them no matter what happens. And really mean it, because people can see through your garbage. If you're blowing smoke and being garbage, they know it. But just ask the question, are you okay?
I appreciate that. I want to thank Sara Boerenko, who's been with us on today's program, talking about mental health issues, red flags, and talking about what we can do in the holidays to get along a little better, help with our kids, and to work through a lot of issues that people have, either in the aftermath of the election or because it's the holidays and they're overwhelmed and things of that nature. Sara, thank you very much. If you liked our program, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube, X, Apple, Spotify, Rumble, and Facebook. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Like and subscribe to The Rich Giardino Show, part of the Elite Influencer Network, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you next time on The Rich Giardino Show, where the Constitution, crime, and politics meet.